Hello, World History class. I'm here for our Week 5 review, back on the mic again. And so we're looking this week at the early empires in the Americas, kind of looking at a whole different hemisphere than where we've been focusing on the first couple weeks, and then looking at the Persian Empire, which is kind of the newest iteration in the Middle East of real powerful, strong state systems. So that's really what we were looking at this week. So moving on to our PowerPoint questions. Um, why do the geographical differences that were listed have such a profound impact on the way civilizations developed around the world? Um, and this is just one example, and a lot of people brought up a lot of very good points from the PowerPoint and the readings. The fact that places such as North and South America were aligned on a different axis, north-south, as opposed to the east-west axis that Eurasia was based upon. And that just simply makes it much more difficult for similar locations to be growing kind of similar food, have similar environments, to engage with their environments in similar ways, and have those kind of processes and technologies transported. If you think about the difference between, for example, the weather in Michigan and the weather in Florida, even though the geographic distance is not that far, the climate can vary very drastically, as opposed to Eurasia, where there's large stretches that are more an east-west basis that are going to have very similar climates. Also, just the fact that the animals that were most conducive to support large agricultural societies are almost exclusively around the Middle East area, as well as most of the crops, which were eventually used to support real large civilizations, were developed around the Middle East area. Certainly, the Americas had certain aspects of this. They had the Three Sisters, the maize, the squash, and the beans. They had llamas, of course, in the Andes. But if you think of the llama, for example, it's pretty contained to a small geographical area. And really was not able to spread outwards from there. So relatively few civilizations were able to take advantage of that. Unlike Eurasia, much more conducive to these animals, and they spread to a much farther degree. So all this comes together to really show you why the number of large stratified state systems which developed in Eurasia were higher than those that developed in the Americas. And I think it's very important to note that we're really talking about quantity here, not quality, because the civilizations which do develop in the Americas, and I'm not just talking about the large agricultural stratified states, I'm talking about all the various cultural groups which develop very advanced and sophisticated ways of interacting with their environment and surviving throughout the Americas, quality-wise, are just as robust as those of Eurasia. Just the real biggest difference is the number of them. The fact that the Eurasian civilizations were be able to grow larger in scale and greater in number than those in the Americas. Also within the Americas, you really see a couple of main areas such as Central America and South America along the Andes, sort of being the main centers of these large stratified states, whereas they seem to be much more widespread in their geographical range in Eurasia. So once more, talking just more about the prevalence and number, not in the advancement or the level of civilization. All of them, I would say, were kind of equal in that sense. Just that some of them had, it made a lot more sense in their geographical region to support larger populations. And that's something I think is oftentimes overlooked. The fact that many of the peoples in North America didn't choose to organize themselves into large state systems because it just didn't make any sense to do so. I mean, what's good of having a population of 10,000 people if you don't have the resources or the geographical means to support them? Just a lot of people are going to be starving. So the fact that the peoples in the Americas pretty much chose to organize their lives and societies around relatively groups that are smaller in scale than in Eurasia, once more just simply shows that they were having a great sophisticated knowledge of their environment and pretty much organizing themselves accordingly. So looking at the Moche pottery and art, what can it tell us about Moche culture and society? I felt like a few people were scandalized by some of the Moche art, but certainly if you can look at it, it's very much some of the most detailed and advanced pottery in the world at this point in time. Incredible amount of craftsmanship went into creating these. And those, along with the things like the decapitator god, I think really shows that there was this importance on life and death within the Moche society. That the creation of new life through the erotic images, the appreciation of life and nature in their various artistic pieces, and also this fascination of death as well, and the fact that they were kind of worshiping this decapitated god, the presence of human sacrifice, and so forth within their society. But overall, it makes it certainly one of the most unique civilizations we have studied thus far, and certainly is something interesting to think about moving forward. So, what were some of the similarities that you noticed between the early civilizations in the Americas and the river valley civilizations in Eurasia that we have covered so far? And what were some of the differences? A lot of people point out a lot of great similarities. The fact that they were all sustained in some way, shape, or form off of agriculture. That kind of the agricultural revolution really made the large societies in both cases possible. The fact, the importance that water played to both of the societies in the Americas and in Eurasia, certainly very, very important that they were all based around large water systems. Um, and that all of them created kind of to some degree, stratified state with, kind of some sort of ruling elite class on top, and the vast majority of other people living underneath them. Of course, there's less evidence of that in the Indus Valley, which we talked about last week, but still, that seems to be typically one of the things that they all had in common. And once more, a lot of the differences came down to was more this idea of kind of the scale that we were talking about. People mentioned that there seemed to be a lot more diversity as far as the cultural models go with the Eurasian civilizations between Egypt, Mesopotamia, the Indus River Valley, and China. Granted, these are now covering numerous areas that are covering large portions, whereas it seems like the American civilizations were a lot of times just new iterations of very established cultural practices. You see the development of pyramids, for example, in so many of the South American and Central American civilizations, the presence of a ball game, the presence of kind of a priestly ruling class, the presence of human sacrifice. So you see a lot of these kind of continuous cultural models, and that a lot of the new civilizations that rise are really rising on a very set model that has been established, and there's not as many outside influences going on from other large agricultural societies in the Americas as you see in Eurasia. One of the things that certainly impacts the development of a lot of these civilizations in Eurasia is just contact, trade, and commerce with other large stratified states around them. So you see a bit more diversification in the form and the nature that these civilizations take within Eurasia that you don't necessarily get within the Americas. Okay, moving on to talk about one of my favorite historical figures, Cyrus the Great, and sort of why he chose to treat the people that he conquered relatively humanely and ally himself with established aristocratic and religious leaders. So a lot of people certainly kind of saw the strategic advantage to what Cyrus was doing, that if he could convince people that he was kind of more or less on their side, let them keep a lot of their traditions, make sure he made peace with kind of the aristocratic or ruling class, make sure that they realized that their position or station within the society was not going to change, that could give him a lot of control and power. But certainly he wouldn't have been the first person to think of this, and it seems like a lot of conquerors and leaders before him still chose to try to rule by fear rather than trying to engage with the people that they were taking over. I think it's important to note that on some level, it seems like Cyrus certainly viewed the people that he was engaging with and conquering, viewing them still as humans and as people rather than just objects to be conquered and taken over. And that he really did try to, respect the religious traditions of the people that he was now ruling over, and trying to redress some of the wrongs from the past. For example, undoing some of the large population movements from the Assyrians and the Babylonians. Sending the Jewish people back to Israel was a part of this, who had been a portion of them captured and taken to Babylon. and in that way trying to sort of redress some of what was seen as unjust practices in the past and really try to make himself appear as a legitimate ruler to everyone, not just people of a Persian ethnic background or a Median ethnic background, but that someone from Babylon could consider him their legitimate ruler, or eventually someone from Egypt or so forth. So really sort of sets himself out there, and in a lot of ways, sort of is the creator of the Persian Empire, which really lasts in one way, shape, or form or another for thousands of years from this point in time. So, a pretty important historical figure who certainly was sort of a standout in the way he went about doing everything. So finally, many aspects of the Persian Empire would be borrowed or emulated by future empires: Rome, Byzantium, the Abbasid Caliphate, the Islamic empires, the Ottoman Empire, and eventually European empires in Russia and even Britain. So, what aspects developed by the Persians do you think were or could have been borrowed by these future empires? And a lot of people pointed to aspects of the military, the fact that having a large military loyal to the ruler was very important. Certainly, that has been emulated. I would say even just the entire idea of having the king as powerful and prevalent within society as he is, even from kind of the trappings of the dress and the wardrobe that the Persian emperor used, the importance of the color purple being kind of a sign of royalty, that all goes all the way through medieval Europe. Um, the fact that people coming in are supposed to sort of bow down and prostrate and make themselves pretty much subservient to the king. You can see parallels between that and the feudal homage system, which is developed during the medieval time period, and that really kind of what we think of today as being ideals of what a powerful king should be was picked up by people like the Roman emperors, the Byzantine emperors, the caliphs in the Islamic empires, the Ottoman sultans, and has been replicated kind of time and time again. And I really think you can trace a lot of that back to the Persian Empire. A few people also pointed out, I think very, very rightly so, the impact that Zoroastrianism and this link between kind of religion and kingship ends up having throughout history as well, and as well as the fact that Zoroastrianism goes on to impact religions such as Judaism, Christianity, and Islam, and that ultimately has a profound impact around the world as well. So, very good job pointing all of these aspects out. Okay, we're going to switch down and move to our document exercise here. And this is kind of an interesting inscription here, the Bestun inscription by King Darius. And that I think it's pretty interesting to really kind of look at the presence of inherent bias within a document such as this. So first of all, what does Darius do or attempt to use, or how is he attempt to use this inscription to show that he's a legitimate and rightful ruler? First of all, he starts off right away by trying to argue that he's from this long line of kings. Long ago, our family had been kings. 8 of my family there were who were formerly kings. I am the 9th. And then kind of detailing the war he had with Gautama, the Magian, the Magi, and how he sort of wrested the kingdom from him. I took from him by the grace of Ahura Mazda, or by the grace of God, essentially. I became king. Ahura Mazda gave me the kingdom. Kind of once more showing that through kind of divine intervention, he has become the king. And scrolling on down, this kind of last period here where he's going through all these people he waged and conquered, sort of showing that once he was king, he was able to hang on to the kingship, waged all these battles, all these wars against all these pretenders to the throne, and sort of making himself the correct king in that way. Of course, as you all realize with the second question, all this might not have been as simple and easy as Darius wanted to make it sound. And I think a lot of you were able to find evidence that maybe not everything Darius is saying and talking about here is 100% accurate or 100% correct. First of all, a lot of you pointed out that even his story about taking the kingdom back from Gautama, the Magi, seems rather problematic as far as the dates when things happened, when things are mentioned. Just the fact that if he's from this long line of kings already, why was there this other king who was already there? And of course, looking back and studying the history, you realize that the Persian Empire was created by Cyrus the Great, and that Darius had absolutely no relation to Cyrus the Great, which means that as much as Darius wants to pretend and make himself a king here, that ultimately he is more or less a pretender to the throne, although he tries to do a lot in the inscription of making it seem like he is the kind of natural king and this natural progression from this royal line, which never really existed prior to this. He says at one point in time that the kingdom, which was taken away from my family, was put in its place. Once more, we know that that might not be 100% accurate, just looking at the other evidence that we have. Another interesting place, and I don't know a lot of people picked up on this, where you can kind of see that perhaps not everything is quite as neat and simple as Darius wants to make it sound, is this list of wars he's engaging with in Armenia. For example, says Darius the king, Dardarish by name, an Armenian, my subject, I sent him forth to Armenia. Thus I said, go, the rebellious army, which does not call itself mine, smite it. And of course, afterwards he says, by the grace of Ahura Mazda, my army smote that rebellious army utterly. Oh, great. So he was able to send out his army to subdue the Armenians. That sounds pretty straightforward, right? Well, then you go down to the next section here, and he says, a second time the rebels came together. Well, it raises the immediate question that if you had smote the rebellious army so utterly, up here in the previous paragraph, who was left to rebel against you again? But okay, there was a second rebellion, so he sends his army out again, and my army smote that rebellious army utterly. Okay, so 2 times now there's problems in Armenia. He sends out his army, which supposedly utterly smites the enemy. However, just one more line down, a 3rd time the rebels came together. Once more, Darius sends out his army, and Ahura Mazda, with all of his strength and power, his army smote the rebellious army utterly. So you get the sense that if really these victories had been as clear-cut and as confident as he's trying to make it sound, why would there be a second, a third, and then go down one more line, a 4th rebellion? So that you can certainly see that this probably was not as easy and straightforward a military conflict as he's trying to make it sound, as certainly these rebellious groups are continuing to pop up and fight against him, and that he's having to continuously send armies back to the region, which means, entirely possible that his armies may not have been as successful in the earlier campaigns as he might have wanted to make it sound, that it took 3 or 4 attempts or tries to eventually secure the area. Moving on down once more to this section where he's listing all these kings that were pretenders to the throne and going through and just mentioning each one and saying how he lied. I've highlighted them all here. He lied, he lied, he lied, he lied, he lied. Seems rather suspicious when you're looking at the inscription. There he's naming these people, calling them all liars, and pretty much saying he's only not a liar himself because he's the one who ultimately ends up conquering them. And that brings us to the last line in the document here, where I think it's pretty telling, where he says, let it convince thee as to what was done by me, regard it not as lies. Now, anytime you see a document that ends with someone pretty much saying, hey, by the way, I haven't been lying to you this whole time, you might want to be a little suspicious. That's ultimately what we see here with the Bestun inscription and with Darius, the fact that there's rather convincing evidence that not everything which he is saying here should be taken at face value. So that really brings us down to number 3. What is the best way for historians or people looking critically at the past to use biased sources such as this, and should they be used at all? Some people said yes, some people said no, and I'm going to let you in on the secret here. Every single source that we're going to look at this semester and any other semester when you're studying history is going to be in some way, shape, or form biased. That's not saying it's a bad source, but it's simply acknowledging that every source that we're looking at is going to have its author, and that author was going to be writing from a particular context, right? They're going to be writing from a particular time period, they're going to be from a particular culture, and that all of those elements are going to be factored into the writing. Some might be more politically motivated, such as the Bestun inscription we're looking at here, than others, but all of the sources that we're looking at are going to be biased. So essentially, yes, historians have to use biased sources because we pretty much can't not use them, otherwise we wouldn't be able to say anything about history. The real important part, though, is how you're going to use them. For example, with the Pastun inscription here, this actually provides a lot of really good information, the conflicts that may have been occurring, the individuals who are involved, but we certainly want to be careful of Darius's claims on face value, and certainly want to start checking into other people's accounts, right? Trying to find archaeological evidence that might support some of this, trying to find other historical evidence, writings from other authors from this time period that might shine light on this time period and what ultimately ends up happening, and not just taking the inscription by itself. And that's really the key here with any historical document, is trying to use it to get the information you can. A lot of times that includes just teasing out kind of ancillary information that the authors might not have intended to put in there at all, but that we can still use to get an idea of their society, where they're coming from, and so forth, and still being able to use that to say something about the past. But certainly, the claims for as far as his legitimate kingship, things like that, you'll certainly want to be checking that with other sources and thinking more critically about it before you go ahead and make some definitive answers. So, yeah, the fact that bias is going to be present in all the documents we're looking at, but it's really just something we need to take account and be aware of as we look at them, and try to factor that into how we're thinking about the documents, how we're interpreting them, and how wide we want to use that document to speak for an entire population, an entire event, an entire group of people, an entire historical situation. Obviously, the more perspectives you can find on any historical element, the better served you're going to be with the more context you can develop around it. And that's really the point of looking at this document from this week, is a very good example of this. Thank you all very much, and I hope you have good luck moving into week 6.